will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, what my amendment does is reduces the salary of Tracy Stone-Manning, Director of the Bureau of Land Management, to $1. And I'd like to recognize for as much time as he needs my good friend from Colorado, Matt Rosendale.
The gentleman from Colorado.
Montana.
Excuse me?
The
gentleman from Montana is recognized.
A little farther north, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Norman, my good friend from South Carolina, for introducing this amendment and for yielding me time. Mr. Chair, I submitted an identical amendment to this one, and I'm glad to see that it is being considered today. This amendment would hold the BLM Director, Tracy Stone-Manning, accountable for her disastrous policies and rightfully reduce her salary to $1. Ms. Manning has been using the Bureau to push her own radical environmentalist agenda at the expense of Montanans and all Americans. Director Manning has repeatedly and intentionally violated this federal statute by issuing rules that are completely at odds with the Taylor Grazing Act. The Taylor Grazing Act lays out best range management practices and clearly states that the purpose of the law is to, and I quote, provide for the orderly use of public land in order to, and again I quote, stabilize the livestock industry. Earlier this year, the BLM issued a conservation and landscape health rule that clearly violates the letter and the spirit of the law by designating multiple use public land under conservation leases for bison. Allowing bison to graze on allotments that should be leased for cattle grazing has been a severe blow to Montana's ranching industry. Director Manning has also continuously ignored the concerns of local landowners and those most affected by her harmful policies by failing to hold public hearings outside of the large cities. Director Manning flagrantly dismissed Montana agricultural groups' concerns in the decision-making process for American Prairie Reserve's bison grazing proposal and granted special provisions for one lessee that no one else in the country has experienced. Her Bureau also refused to collaborate with the relevant state agencies and declined to hold sufficient opportunities for local engagement. This is a process we have seen far too often with the Bureau of Land Management under her leadership, creating harmful rules and refusing to take input or provide engagement opportunities for those who are most impacted by those rules. Director Manning has also refused to follow the congressionally mandated quarterly requirements for the federal land leases. Under this administration, we have seen the fewest acres leased for oil and gas since World War II, with only those lease sales taking place in Montana. This directly contradicts Congress' directive and a Louisiana District Court reversal of the administration's leasing moratorium. At the same time, Americans continue to face rising energy costs and persistent inflation. Intentionally stalling onshore and gas production is a dereliction of duty and a slap in the face to hardworking Americans, especially those who rely on these public lands to keep their economy afloat. This climate of zealotry and blatant disregard for the rule of law has been evident with Director Stone-Manning for a long time. She collaborated with tree-spiking eco-terrorists at the start of her career, and there's no reason to believe that her views have substantially changed. For all these reasons, and many more, Director Stone-Manning needs to be held accountable. Congress cannot stand by idly while these climate extremists use our federal agencies to destroy local economies and the livelihood of everyday Americans. This amendment will put all of Biden's disastrous energy heads on notice and force them to finally follow the rule of law that Congress passed nearly 90 years ago. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back to my good friend from South Carolina.
I reserve.
The gentleman from South Carolina reserves. For what purpose? For what purpose?
Me. Claim time in opposition.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I guess it's time that I got off my rear end here and talked a little bit. And I wanted to let people know why I have opposed all of the Holman rule amendments that have come before us. I think I screwed up on one and voted the wrong way. But anyway, I've opposed all of them for a number of reasons. The Holman Rule, when it was originally put in place, and then it was kind of repealed over the last couple Congresses and then put in place before. If you look back in the history of it, through the whole appropriation process, I can only remember 1 or 2 times when the Holman Rule was actually used. And it was used because the individual had committed criminal activity. That's why they cut the salary. Obviously didn't pass, but that was the intent behind it. Second reason is, and I question the constitutionality of the Holman Rule altogether. We don't have the authority to fire someone in the administration. We don't have the authority to fire them. This is a way to get around that. By reducing someone's salary to $1, you've essentially fired them, unless they can live on $1 for a year. I don't know many people that can do that. But this is a way to get around what our constitutional responsibility is, I believe. Thirdly, and believe me, I don't always agree, in fact, seldom agree, with the Bureau of Land Management's decisions on a lot of things. Elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. If you disagree with them because of a policy, why do you think they were hired? They were hired to carry out the policies of this administration. Now, maybe you don't like those policies. I don't like some of those policies. And that's a good reason to get off our rear ends and make sure that we eliminate this administration about 12 months from now. It is not a reason to reduce someone's salary because they are implementing a policy for the administration that hired them. And that's why I haven't supported any of the Holman Rules, because nobody stood up here and said, well, I believe they've engaged in criminal activity. Haven't heard it. Until I do, I'll continue to oppose these amendments. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Idaho reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would just add that, you're not firing anybody. You're just reducing their salary to what they're, in the minds of this body, believe that it's worth. $1 is plenty of money for what this lady does. And in the words of Barack Obama, and by the way, she makes $148,500. The words of Bob Ashley, which was the first BLM director under President Obama, said that Stone-Manning's involvement with tree spiking, which should disqualify her for leading the agencies. I urge support for my amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Idaho is recognized.
All I know is if you reduce my salary to $1, you effectively fired me. Anyway, I oppose this amendment, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Idaho yields the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
To vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order